welcome to Lochaber Talks. I'm Marie, and today we've got Ian Mckinnon from the Lochaber No More Park Group, Fergus Ewing MSP. So I'm just going to start by asking Fergus a couple of questions. So, Fergus, what is your current stance on these national park nominations?
Well, I don't think it's time for a new national park in Scotland, simply because the problems in the health service, education, economy are a greater call on public money. And I don't have to say, Marie, to anyone in Lochaber that that's the case, because the campaign for the Belfort has stalled. And, I recall attending that great big meeting at Lochaber when a huge proportion of the folk were there when it was under threat. So I don't think it's a priority. But secondly, I live in the Cairngorms National Park. I've also lived in Loch Lomond National Park before. And I'm disappointed that as they've worked out, they haven't really served the local people. And in particular, to be accurate, Section 1 of the National Parks Act 2000 specifies the aims of the park. And that's conservation, sustainable use of natural resources, recreation, but also social and economic development. And I don't really think it's succeeded in the aims. And the reason is, I don't think that they really are representative, nor have they properly tried to work with the local people, particularly farmers and crofters and land managers, but also businesses. And I've seen it in Cairngorm, and it's very sad, actually. And there are many, many problems with the Cairngorms Park in particular. Clashes of personality, concerns about management style, and above all, a lack of listening to the local people. So I was against the Marine National Park that where Ian Mckinnon really led the campaign and put a huge amount of effort into it. And it's good to see him again after 18 years, because thanks to the boundary commissioners, I'm no longer the Lochaber MSP, that's Kate Forbes. But I just don't think that they serve the local people well, and they're a great disappointment to me, actually, because they could have worked a lot better, but they haven't. So if I was a farmer or crofter in Lochaber, or Galloway, or Perthshire, or Lochal, wherever, I would be voting against the park, and we can maybe come on to that later about how the people have their say.
So, you live in Cairngorm National Park. So, when it was formed 20 odd years ago, what have the benefits been to the local population?
Well, I don't really think there have been benefits. There's been disadvantages. I mean, the time it takes to build new housing developments, 13 years in one case. Also, we wanted a new town, essentially, on the other side of the Spey from Aviemore, called Camas Moor. And I believe that was blocked by the National Park, who gave it planning permission, yes, but they imposed conditions which were undeliverable. I mean, they had to build a full Monty Bridge over the River Spey. They'd offered a footbridge, but they were required to build which development in Scotland does a developer have to build a new bridge over a river, for goodness sake? Meanwhile, we've seen in Tornagrain, just beside the airports in Dalcross, a brand new town there built by Murray Estates, and I've supported that. That's a good thing. And this was going to be a high-quality development, Marie, with affordable housing as well. So that's just one example. I could give you many, many more. But there's a head of steam building up in Cairngorm. The last thing I would say is that a local body in Aviemore, a community forum, recently held a survey of around over 400 members. And the question was, do you think the Cairngorms National Park is doing well? Do you think it's doing well? And we're nearly 23 years in now. And 92% said no, and a pitiful 3% said yes. 3%. So, that's not very impressive, is it?
No, I actually saw that myself on the Aviemore and Spey Valley group, wasn't it? So it's not,
Yes.
It's a portion of people that actually live and work in the park. It's not just, just random people voting, is it?
I think it was a fairly accurate survey, but the figures are quite staggering. 92 to 3 is some majority. The SNP would give their eye teeth for that in a referendum, and I do, think that, since we're on the point, that I don't think a national park should be set up anywhere unless there is first a proper independently held referendum where the people can have their say. I don't think it should be foisted on anybody. And actually, in the House Agreement between the Greens and the SNP, they say that there won't be a national park unless there's support for it. But so far, the support has come from sort of random activists, a handful of people in each case, who are zealots for a national park. And I know in Lochaber that there are many concerns that some communities haven't been properly consulted at all. So, so I think the only way really that there could be a basis for any new national park is if there is first held in the local park boundaries or proposed boundaries, using the voters' roll, a referendum to ask the people if they wish to be a national park. And I would be campaigning in such a referendum against it on the basis of the experience that I've had, probably as long as anybody in the Scottish Parliament. There's only 3 of us that were elected first past the post that are still there from 1999. And I attended every meeting of the National Park Committee and argued this at the time and didn't succeed. But I think things have changed now, and I think there's a head of steam building up, Marie, for people to have their say.
The Lochaber National Park Working Group put forward a caveat in their application to say if they're not allowed to have a vote, then they'll withdraw the application. And we asked them that, and they said that they can withdraw it, but can they? Can they withdraw their
application? I think they both. Well, I don't see why not, but my understanding is that the nomination didn't enjoy the support of the local councillors. And that whereas there has been a survey of opinion, I understand, well, I haven't seen the details, Marie, of this, that survey has been called into question as to its impartiality and the way in which it was carried out, with people being possibly voting more than once. So, let the people have their say. I mean, I thought the SNP was in favour of referenda. I thought they thought that it was a good idea. So how can they deny people the right to have their say? It goes against all the instincts of someone who has been in the SNP that stands up for the people of Scotland. And the idea it could be foisted on a place like Lochaber to me, is absolutely absurd. And the last time it was tried in 2006, I mean, I remember a local councillor who I won't name, but a Lib Dem councillor, I think at the time, said that the Marine National Park was coming quotes like a steam train. Well, that steam train never actually left the station, because the people spoke, and they spoke through Ian and the petition, and that saw it off, basically, I think. And I think the campaign in Lochaber will see it off again, actually. That's the impression I get from what I know, although, I'm no longer the MSP, that's Kate Forbes, but I feel that she's of like mind to myself, perhaps. I don't know, you'd have to ask her.
So I'll ask Ian, you, the No More group met with Kate Forbes. How did you get on?
I wasn't one that attended that meeting. That was Debbie and John. I was out to sea. I hope you can hear me okay. The wind's picking up quite strongly. And hello, Fergus. It's great to see you again.
Likewise, Ian.
I didn't attend that meeting with Kate, but I've spoken to her a number of times in the past on a number of local issues affecting the likes of crofting, farming, fishing, aquaculture, and she's always been very, very aware of the issues and very supportive. And the feedback that I got from Debbie and John, who did speak to her, they said that she was very, very helpful, very supportive, and very aware of what's going on. I think one of the issues here is, what can we do? Initially, we had hoped that the small number of people who were putting forward the application would recognise that they didn't have the support of the people. they would recognise that the other areas that had withdrawn their applications had done it for very good and valid reasons, like they didn't have enough time, they didn't have enough information, and they could not accurately canvass the opinion or will of the people. And this goes back to something that Fergus helped us with back in 2006, when a coastal and marine national park, a third national park in the form of a coastal and marine one, was first voiced. And we raised a petition with Fergus's help and put it in that a local referendum become an integral part of the National Park, the National Parks Act, Scotland. The proposal for a coastal and marine national park was withdrawn then, and that petition was shelved. And as I understand it, the shelf life has passed, and we would have to raise another petition, which we have. We've raised another petition asking that no more national parks go forward in Scotland without a thorough assessment of how the two existing national parks are doing. You can go online and sign that at the Petitions Committee website on ScotGov. So if you can find that and you have concerns, would appreciate your support there. So Kate was supportive and I believe shared their concerns, not just over the national park, but the timing of it. As Fergus highlighted there, we're facing a number of really, really significant crises. Arguably the greatest crisis that we're facing, in numbers since the last war. And for Lorna Slater to highlight the biodiversity crisis and the nature crisis and climate crisis, and believe that a national park, a third national park, will have any impact whatsoever, while happily ignoring things like a rural housing crisis, the lack of infrastructure crisis, your crisis across the board, the health service crisis, just after COVID. If we have money to spend, there are far more deserving causes than a national park. Ben Nevis is still going to be here in 200 years. Lochiel and Lochlinny will still be here. We have cared for them, and cared for them, I would argue, pretty well. And so this is not the crisis that it's being portrayed as. And a national park really is not going to have any impact. The real crisis was that the Greens wanted in on power. That was the crisis. There was a shortage of a parliamentary majority crisis. And that was the only crisis that the Butte House Agreement solved. And if you look at it in retrospect, I have to say, I'm sad to say, that it didn't really solve that crisis either. I would argue that it's made it a damn sight worse. And that's sad for a lot of the people who have supported the SNP and supported the likes of Fergus and Kate Forbes, who, are the backbone of the SNP, I would argue.
Yeah, I think, Marie, there's some wider concerns as well, and I think Ian has touched on them, because it's very often said that, what does a national park actually do? What difference does it make? Now, frequently the advocates for the park say, we need it to protect the environment. Well, how exactly? I mean, you could argue that the protection is provided by existing designations where areas are designated as areas of scientific interest. And there's many, many of these designations, incidentally, and I'm not really sure that they work. But the existence of a park itself, all it creates is a new bureaucracy. I mean, the park in Cairngorm costs about 13 million. The chief executive gets paid 90,000 plus a big pension whack. So the total is just less than the salary that the First Minister earned, and although there's perhaps pension on top of that, but it's nearly about £130,000. So what exactly do they do? You know, it's and there's a related point as well, which is this, that people often talk about farmers and conservationists, or as if farmers and crofters aren't conservationists. Well, I'll tell you this. I mean, I've worked with farmers and conservationists all over Scotland, but particularly my constituency, but as rural secretary, there's nobody that cares more for the land or knows more about it than the farmers and crofters. And similarly, on the sea, nobody will know more about inshore fishing than Ian, and it's mussels you're doing, Ian. But I mean, the fishermen I've met, you know, from Tarbet to the Northern Isles, to the Western Isles, around Pittenweem, down by Eyemouth, they know far, far more, and they care far more about our looking after the sea for the future generation of fishermen than anybody else. And this idea that somehow the people that actually do the work day in, day out are kind of damaging the environment or hostile to it is complete rubbish. It's the opposite, actually. And there's a real danger that society has accepted this glib classification that somehow the environmentalists are the superior guys that sit in London or Edinburgh behind computers, whereas people like Ian and people like Rory Ormiston, you know, in my constituency, or John Kirk, who's on the Cairngorm Park Authority, they know more about the lands than any of the government-appointed members to the Park Authority will ever do. And I know that just for a fact, an absolute fact, because, I mean, I saw John Kirk just at the weekend there, and I've been in touch with, and I know as friends, most of the elected people on the boards. Maybe if the parks had a purely elected local board members, they may have operated better, but they don't. They've got a strange mixter-maxter composition with an unwieldy board of about 20 members, far, far too many, because of a deal that was struck back in 2000. So, you know, I think there's lots of contradictions beneath the surface, and I don't really believe that having a park protects anything of itself. But it does create a giant, expensive bureaucracy, which, frankly, I'm not sure we can afford.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions, actually, was how can the Scottish government have fought all of this when there's so many other areas?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a sop to the Green Party, as Ian has said. The Butte House Agreement, I'm afraid, in my view, has been an out-and-out disaster. And, you know, if you look at the benefits and the disadvantages, the benefits are simply that the SNP gets an easier ride at Holyrood. Now, that's not a legitimate public good. That's not a legitimate concern. Back in 2007 to 11, we only had 47 MSPs, but we survived for the 4 years of that parliament because we did grown-up deals with the other parties, the main parties, that is. And I don't see why, with just one short of a majority, with over 60 MSPs, we can't do that now. But the disadvantages, we've had the highly protected marine areas, an absolute disaster for fishermen, so bad that I actually tore up that document in the parliamentary chamber. I got a bit of a row from my sister, the deputy presiding officer at the time, but hey ho, I think my mother, if she'd been alive, would have been proud of me. But you know, the things that the Greens have foisted, I mean, I'm sure that they mean well, but I don't really think they know what they're doing, or they know what Ian is doing, or what farmers or crofters do. And I think I've got a better insight, simply because of the 25 years I've been an MSP and the 5 years I was the rural secretary, where, you know, I tried to get out of Edinburgh as much as possible, go and speak to people about what they do. And what I found is an immense knowledge and expertise about the countryside, about how things actually work, how to look after things for the next generation. That's what people in Scotland that actually do the work care for, and they deserve the credit for it, Marie. I don't think they get the credit for that, and that grieves me greatly, and that's why, you know, I'm delighted to make this point on your podcast today.
So, this Bute House agreement, okay, is it a legally binding document?
Well, it's a political stitch-up between the SNP and the Greens. You know, I would point out that it wasn't mooted in the election in 2021. It was sprung on the people after the election was safely out of the way. So there was the people were never asked if they wanted the SNP to do a deal with the Greens. In fact, if they'd been asked beforehand, I'm not quite sure we would have done as well as we did in the 2021 election. I've suggested it should be scrapped because I'm afraid I think the Greens are extremists, and their policies of gender reform and conversion therapy, and I think they're even in favour of these puberty blockers. Goodness, God help us all. I mean, they say they're progressive and they support equality, but I don't really know many people that support these policies, quite frankly. And that's not to say that I'm against anybody or I don't have sympathy for people that, you know, have minority interests and pursuits and all the rest of it, and live and let live, I say. But I just think they are a bunch of extremists, and they shouldn't really be in government at all. And I would like to see us work more with the other main parties. I think that's what people in Scotland want us to do. Just last week, we won a campaign in Grantown to restore a cut to the Grantown Health Centre, which was promised to be expanded. And I launched a campaign and brought in the Tory and Labour MSPs, and we worked very well together, Marie, and we won the campaign. And I got about 60 letters from people thanking me, and every single one of them said, it's so nice to see politicians from the major parties working together, because we don't understand what the arguments are about half the time. So, you know, the Bute House agreement is not legally binding, it's politically binding. Hamza could scrap it tomorrow, and indeed that's, I think, what he should do. And I've kind of gone out a wee bit on a limb, I suppose, and, you know, I will continue to do so because I'm at the age now where, frankly, there's nothing they can do about me. My job is to speak out. And, you know, as I said, if my constituents had wanted a doormat, then they would have gone down to B&Q. So my job is to speak out, and to speak out on issues like this, which matter to people. And
Yeah.
and you know, I wanted to ask Ian a question. I don't know if I'm allowed to, but
Aye.
but I mean,
Go.
Ian, I wanted just to, if Ian could remind me how many signatures he personally managed to get on the petition, which he referred to back in 2006, I think it was, because it was this, I think, a world record petition number, Ian, wasn't it?
I honestly cannot remember. If you remember, the other lad that did it, a former fisherman who had been injured and now does a lot of work with Disability Scotland, Arthur Cowie. And Arthur was travelling each day on the train from Mallaig to Fort William, and he did the survey. And one of the things that it highlighted was a number of people came particularly up to Mallaig and the West Coast because they wanted to avoid the national parks. Some of them were even people who lived in national parks down in England and wanted to get out of them. They regarded the West Coast from the Northwest Coast as one of the last wild places where you weren't constantly confronted with rangers, with, you know, rules and regulations. I think one of the really big concerns that we have about national parks is the insidious nature. They don't come in saying, you know, you can't do this, you can't, but slowly over a period of time. And Lorna Slater made it quite clear in the Zoom meeting that we had with her a couple of weeks back. She made it quite clear that basically a national park designation is ad infinitum till the end of time. And in that period, they can put in lots of tiny restrictions, lots of tiny rules and regulations and bylaws that just basically make it not worth living for the people who try to live and work here. And eventually it becomes too difficult. And we're living in a place where it is pretty difficult already to make a living, to run a business. We're challenged by, many things, just the rural nature of it. And so to come in and add other potential restrictions really makes it nigh on impossible. And we see that in the other national parks where young people leave, the demographic changes, and you end up with a lot of older people. House prices go up. And that causes a lot of other problems in terms of providing other services. Things like social care for elderly people. We've seen two rural social care establishments, one in Mallaig, one down in Ardnamurchan, having to close because they can't get staff. The elderly people still need care, and so we're having to import care workers via private agencies at really significantly increased costs. And it all has that knock-on effect. We find it difficult at times to get doctors. We certainly find it difficult at times to get teachers. Lots and lots because of the rural nature of the area. And it would appear from what we're looking at in the existing national parks and then statistics that are within the Office of National Statistics, is that a national park designation makes this worse. And I think if you go into Cairngorm, certainly on Loch Lomond, they admit that and they accept it, that these challenges are made worse. And so why do we want to do this? I think one of the other things that I would like to come in that Fergus pointed out, the conservation industry was worth $26.1 billion in 2021. And they say it's rising at about a rate of over 10% a year. And basically it's propaganda. It's saying, give us money and we will look after the place. We will Who are they going to protect Ben Nevis from? Who is attacking Ben Nevis? Is it the people of Fort William? Who is attacking the Lochiel? Who's attacking Loch Linnhe? As a fisherman and a mussel farmer, I'm out here pretty much every day of the week. And the one person that I do not see is a conservationist. I did 3 years of a science degree at Glasgow University. And I know what it means to come in and take samples. When Lorna Slater and her Green Companions proposed these highly protected marine areas, they were going to assess it once every 5 or 6 years. We've had a Sound of Arisaig Special Area of Conservation since 1995, and there has been no further assessment. There was no initial assessment on a lot of the marine protected areas out there, so we had no guiding line to assess whether the marine protected areas have had any positive or negative impact. But we have an industry based upon propaganda that are putting out the begging bowl and painting a horror story. The end of the world is nigh. And I'm telling you, it's not. Beavers been a massive success. Whether they've been released in the Cairngorms, they're breeding and they're spreading. White-tailed sea eagles can now be seen over all of Scotland. Red kites have been a great success. This portrayal of nature in crisis, it's propaganda. And it's big money. It's big money corporate conservation. And when they talk about biodiversity, it's boutique biodiversity. They were very, very fashionable 40 years ago on the island of Rum. They've fallen out of fashion. Trees are in fashion. They want trees, so they're perfectly happy to shoot deer now randomly at will. And they're trying to force landowners to shoot deer. So that they can protect, they can do that boutique biodiversity. And there's no guarantee that that's going to work. If you look at conservation and national parks around the world, they haven't saved the rhino. You know, I question whether the Cairngorms National Park is saving the capercaillie. But they'll claim to, and they'll demand money, and they'll accuse, this needs protected. Answer me, who is attacking Ben Nevis? Tell me that, Lorna. I need to know.
I think you'll wait a wee while for Lorna's answer to that one. But I mean, I entirely agree, Marie, with what Ian has said. And, you know, take the capercaillie. I mean, they spent millions and millions and millions of pounds on the capercaillie. But every local farmer, crofter and gamekeeper tells me that the reason that the capper is now under threat of extinction is that it's a ground nesting bird, and the eggs are basically breakfast, lunch and tea for a whole variety of predators, foxes, pine marten.
Predators.
Well, exactly. So you've got an endangered species threatened by a protected species. And moreover, the park, even although Nature Scott now recommend control of predators such as the foxes, the park aren't keen on that at all because the RSPB aren't keen on it. And therefore, millions have been wasted on this bird. Millions and millions of pounds. Chuck down the fiscal stang. And Ian is absolutely right. It is an industry. And the other thing about conservationists is they're really preservationists. They don't want to conserve is to keep the best. It doesn't mean to keep things the same. Preservation is to keep things in aspect. And that's what they want. They're preservationists. They're not actually conservationists, because that means not just keeping everything as it is, but preserving keeping the very best. So, and the other thing about this, it is a mass industry, is that they never give up. I mean, they won't be happy until they've destroyed inshore fishing. I'm absolutely certain of that. And go and speak to Mallaig and Northwest or Clyde Fishermen's Association, and they'll give you chapter and verse. And they won't be happy until they've got rid of every gamekeeper on the land. And that now has created real conflict and tension in rural Scotland that didn't exist 25 years ago, I don't think, where we had a more moderate view from Holyrood, and all the main parties supported that. And even Robin Harper was a more approachable man than the current Greens, actually. So Ian is absolutely right. We're up against an insidious big industry. It's not a group of do-gooders. I mean, a lot of the ordinary members are, and some of them live locally, very decent people, but they're run by faceless people down in London with huge or funded by, in some cases, American shadowy organizations. And I think they're driving the real rural Scotland down. And it's, as Ian says, it's very sad to see, particularly somebody like myself that's been around now in politics for 3 decades on the front line, and gradually seen the onward march of the conservationist and the interests of people like Ian and people that I know have become very friendly with over the years, who are actually managing the land day by day, every single day of their lives, a disregarded, discredited, and underappreciated when they're putting food on the table for the people of Scotland and Britain and beyond. And you know, I hope the mood is turning. I think there are some signs that the mood is turning, but it's essential that people like Ian and myself from different perspectives speak out, really, which is, you know, why I come on programs such as this. You know, even if there's only a few hundred people listening, I hope that we can spread the word and fight back for the ordinary people in rural Scotland.
I'd like to come in and just say, Fergus, I'm sure your mother would have been proud of you ripping up that HPMA proposal, and we were proud of you. It was a really effective. It was a really effective thing to do, and we were proud of you. And it certainly started to turn the tide. I would say that looking at Nature Scott's board meeting back in, I think, the 6th of December, they highlighted that they've just changed the name on the HPMA page and put it back out there again. So we didn't get rid of it. And I do think there needs to be questions asked over the role of Nature Scott, particularly in this Lochaber bid. They funded Nevis Landscape Partnership, of which 4 of the directors ended up on the proposing working group. They funded them and saved them from going obsolete. And now Nature Scott are assessing the bids, and it is accepted in the National Parks Act. It says that the ministers will appoint a reporter, and it is accepted that Nature Scott will be the reporter. And Lorna Slater is the minister responsible for Nature Scott. I cannot look at that process and see any fairness, any equality, or any what's the third one where you can see everything? Transparency. There's, you know, and that's a real concern. We are looking at the possibility of a public inquiry. It's quite far off. I'm not a lawyer, and
Lost the sound there, Ian.
that was somebody phoning me, a customer phoning. I'll get on later. I cut them off. So I'm still out on the boat right now. But that is a real concern that Nature Scott, a government-funded agency, a government agency, can, you know, that's really it's at the centre of the process, should be funding some of the proposers. I struggle with that in terms of fairness, equality and transparency.
Yeah, they're not a referee, they're a player.
Yeah.
The whole process is a fix. Let's face it. And the only way to stop it is to speak out.
Yeah.
You know, I'm concerned to hear what you say about them bringing back the HPMA proposals. Doesn't surprise me in the slightest. They'll do it with a back door.
I'll send you the page later on, Fergus, and you can have a read for yourself.
I'll do that because they're not going to get away. We're not going to let them get away with that. They cannot get away with. I tore up the speech physically. They tore up the policy metaphorically. And Hamza told me it was off the table. Hamza assured me of that at my mother's funeral's wake. It's off the table, he said. I don't care if it's a private conversation or not. That's what he said, and I'm saying it right now. There's no jiggery-pokery and dirty business where they sneak it back in again. And my worry is, though, as long as these Greens are at the table, we're going to see the onward march of attacks on what you do, Ian, and what your colleagues do in the West Coast in particular, from a lot of so-called conservationists that really are just anti-fishing, and for reasons that are difficult to understand. And an awful lot of the propaganda about so-called merits of conservation in existing protected areas seem to me to be in very shaky ground. And, people such as the leaders of the Western Isles fisheries associations have shown me evidence that in some of these so-called protected areas, the seabed is barren.
Yeah.
And you'll know more than me about all that stuff.
There are certain areas where any species that exist are micro species. You'll get maybe 10 or 15 species of worm living in mud. We recently attended a meeting of a conservation organisation and asked them the questions. Do you know the minimum landing size for lobsters? What is the minimum landing size for haddock? What size of square mesh panel do you need in to fish in this area? And they couldn't answer any of them. They knew nothing about the current fisheries management. They had no understanding. They regarded fishermen as some sort of Neanderthal troglodyte who just wanted to destroy the seabed and everything in it. They couldn't answer simple, basic questions. That once you get rid of all the fishermen, all the farmers, all the crofters, all the gamekeepers, what are you going to eat? But Britain does not produce enough food to feed the people at the moment. Less than 1%, I think it's about half of 1% of the people in this country are involved in primary food production. We have an ongoing food crisis. Where are you going to get that? And nobody can answer it, but they still want to get rid of fishermen. And you say, well, why? And there was a wonderful picture came out recently to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Lamlash Bay conservation area. And it was like one of those old Charles Atlas before and after. There's a skinny wee kid, and then the next one he's muscle bound. And so in the Lamlash, there was a picture of the seabed where it was just plain seabed. In the next one, there's some floating seaweed and some fish. That happens with the tide. That was nothing to do with conservation. The sea is constantly changing. You can look in 1 minute and see nothing. 2 minutes later, with a big wave, fish come in and seaweed comes in. And this is the level of science that we're dealing with. It's pathetic. And for nature's got to allow this to happen. To not come in and be the scientific organisation to recognise, is this working? It's frightening. It's frightening, the power of conservation propaganda. They're scaremongering to get rid of the people who are producing your food, who are attempting to feed the country. And we're not doing it willy-nilly. One day, just before Christmas last year, Christmas 2023, I was out fishing lobsters and I threw back 400 pounds worth of buried lobsters. I don't have to do that. I don't have to do it legally, but I do it because it's common sense. Throwing back undersized lobsters, undersized scallops, stitching a square mesh panel into a net so that the fish can get out, that's conservation. Wearing a Save the Whale t-shirt is a fashion statement. We've really got to wake up to the idea that nipping out in a boat for an afternoon is only a political statement. If you want to know it, you've got to do it for a while. And then you realise that the experts are the fishermen. If you want a highly protected marine area, come to the fishermen and we will give you one. We will tell you where there's a reasonable area, but we will restrict the size of it, and we will demand that it is monitored constantly to show that it works.
Yeah.
And there's severe questions as to whether it will work. Because one of the first things that happens is that you get a huge growth in predators. And they'll eat all of the things. That's been seen in terrestrial national parks all over the world.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Wondered, Fergus, if we could come back round to Cairngorm National Park.
sure.
And in your time living in the park, has the infrastructure improved?
No, it hasn't at all. I mean, there's the A9. I mean, we're still campaigning to have it dualed. There's been really no significant improvement in the transport system. And you know, it's desperately sad. I gather the park bosses are off to Switzerland to do a study about reintroducing the lynx. This is completely mad. I mean, if the conservationists want to introduce the lynx, why don't they try it down at St James's Park in London, see how they go on, if they're so keen on it? Because, I mean, apart from anything else, you never see the lynx. I mean, it's not an animal that you can enjoy watching because it's a secretive animal. But to introduce apex predators in Scotland, I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, the damage that is done now with sea eagles to lambs on the west coast is such that it's pushing people out of hill farming in places like Skye. And the farmers who care deeply for the welfare of their sheep and their lambs lie awake at night worrying if they'll be alive. Not just lambs, sheep as well. And if they get attacked by a she eagle, they just crawl into the undergrowth. That's what they do to die. It's very sad. That's the reality of it. And you know, as Ian has said, the conservationists, it's just a big industry, and they won't be happy until they've eliminated shooting sports and also fishing and farming of most types, as far as I can see it. And they want to rewild now. And this carbon credit racket is the new racket in the islands, and it's not giving any benefit to the local people at all.
See now sorry to interrupt you, Fergus. See now that you mentioned that, and it was one of the questions I was going to talk about, is Brewdog in Kinrara. Now, we all know about the secret forest, and it was Nick Kemp, my very first national park interview, that we talked about. Brewdog came in, they got £1 million from the Scottish Government, planted all these trees. Now half of these trees are dead. They turned up all the peat, so of course that, you know, all the carbon into the air. And this has been allowed to happen within the Cairngorm National Park boundary. And who's going to sort all that out?
Well, I've read Mr. Kemp's analysis, and it is hugely concerning. And you're absolutely right. Nobody is doing anything about it. The park, the Scottish Forestry. I mean, I was the forestry minister as well as farming and fishing, and you know, we in Britain we import 80% of the timber that we need. It's the second highest level of timber imports in the world after China. This is ridiculous, and we need our own timber to support our sawmill industry and our panel products industry, which can actually turn housing, for example, into a more sustainable form by replacing gradually concrete and brick, which of course are the preferred building materials in England. So it would be sensible, it would be good for the environment if we have more of our own productive forestry. But it's got to be, it's like everything else, it's got to be done in the right way, the right tree in the right place. And silviculture, the proper planting of trees, is again something that we have expertise in, but it seems now to have been diverted by various bodies that think that we only should be planting trees which look nice and, you know, which are attractive to the eye at the expense of productive trees. Now, there's got to be a balance. You shouldn't plant trees on good farmland, for example. But there is a lot of scope for that. But as I understand it, you know, Brewdog's record is not one that is impressing people locally. I think they got rid of some local employees who'd been serving in the previous estate. When in fact, what they should have done was to keep them on and use their knowledge and expertise to help them manage the land. And that's just one instance of rewilding, which, you know, is becoming, I think, more and more of concern to many people. But going back to cairngorms, the fundamental problem is that they just don't reach out to the people. And it's partly because of the management, the current management. And the last thing I would say is that recently, a great guy called Stuart Fulton, who was the chief executive of the Cairngorm Partnership, that was the precursor to the Cairngorm National Authority, he passed away. But everybody locally in Strathspey says that he behaved as the leader of a national park should have behaved. It's my belief if he had been chosen as the chief executive of the national park, things might have worked out differently. And we all hope that they did. You know, local food supply, farmers' markets, a niche product for beef and lamb produced within the national park. These are things they could have done. Regular meetings with farmers to find out what works and what doesn't. Listening to the local people. That's what Stuart Fulton did. But it's not what Grant Lawyer does, I'm afraid. And it's not what his managers do either. And that's leading to an awful lot of conflict. In fact, you know, if there were a referendum in the Cairngorm National Park Authority, I think it would be questionable if the local people that live within the boundaries would vote to continue to have a national park. And I suspect that's one of the reasons why the Warner Slater won't be offering a referendum anytime soon, either in Cairngorm or anywhere else. But I'll be raising it in Parliament, that's for sure, over the next weeks, I hope. And since the SNP is in favour of referendum, then I can't quite see how we can be selective and deny it to people and instead just foist this national park status either in Lochaber, Galloway or anywhere else.
So the last question, how can the people stop any new national parks being created? What can the people do you think?
Is that from you? Is it Ian?
Fergus, sorry, you.
Well, I actually think that the people in Lochaber, as always, are stepping up to the plate. And, you know, Ian and Deborah Carmichael and others have already made it their business to speak out, as Ian did 18 years ago. And I think what you've done already, in my view, is likely to see off Lochaber as a candidate. I think the suspicion was always that this process is in itself a bit of a window dressing because they're really planning to have Galloway as the selected area. There's that feeling. I mean, that may or may not be correct, but whether that is or is not correct, what I think is the case is that there has been a sufficient demonstration in Lochaber of very, very strong, sustained opposition that I would be astonished if Warner Slater and the Scottish Government decide to take on Lochaber. And I tell you this, if they take on Lochaber, the people of Lochaber will win and Warner Slater will lose, and she'll regret it bitterly. I guarantee that today. And lastly, the petition that Ian has referred to is coming to Petitions Committee. I think it will probably be heard at the beginning of May or the middle of May. And that will allow Ian and Deborah and others, I hope, to be heard. I will certainly argue that they should be given a hearing, perhaps, which I hope will take place before the summer recess, so that in the petitions, which is the People's Committee, it's the door that people can walk through to the Parliament to have their say. And I hope that, just as we've heard Ian speak out very strongly today on your podcast, we'll hear him speaking out very strongly in Holyrood before the summer. And, we need to carry on doing this sort of thing, because persistence is what succeeds in many campaigns. And what you need to be above everything else, in my view, is thrawn. And I hope you don't mind me saying so, Ian, but you are thrawn. And that's a good thing in my book, because it's what's required. And if people in Galloway do the same thing, then I think they can succeed as well, and good luck for them.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you, Ian and Fergus, for talking to us.
I'm going to have the last word here,
Okay,
and that is,
go.
if I'm a thrown Scotsman, Fergus, then I'm in very good company, and thank God for us. And yourself and your family, your mother, were thrown before. And it's great to be described that way. Thank you.
Very good.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Today. Thank you.
All the best.